Welcome to the January 12th special meeting for the school board. I'd like to begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Community comment. We have public
community comment on the agenda items. Yep.
Yeah, there's
community comment. Any changes to the agenda, Dr. Jetty?
No.
Community comment. This time I will close community comment. Finalize 2023 warrant.
Yep, so first of all, I want to thank the board for having this session tonight. I think a couple of things, and I'll start with an apology, because when we met with the board last Wednesday, things were still in flux. We had the approval of the spirit, if you would, of the warrant going forward. Doug and I were in meeting. Well, Doug did a ton of work on Thursday during the day, and also JD from the budget committee really was adamant that he wanted numbers in there. They wanted to be able to vote. He needed numbers in there, and so
the tax rate.
Yeah, Doug did a ton of work to make that happen, and then he and I were meeting in the office really right up until 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, getting the numbers finalized, and you can see that they still have adjusted even further, right? So, I mean, the good news is that it's probably one of the most, we have the highest degree of confidence, if you would, in where we stand on this, but on the other side, I feel like the board didn't get a chance. You learned about the numbers as they were revealed to the budget committee, and that's not the way that's supposed to work either. So I think having the meeting tonight in order to make sure the board can ask questions and understand this is really critical. And there are some potential ramifications, and that's why I've asked our admin team to be here tonight, because we have set up the largest differential between the default and the operating budget that I've seen in my time in Litchfield, and that I've seen in my time in Senate Bill 2 districts, right? So when you're voting on a budget in this way, and I think it's absolutely critical that the board members understand, if we get the default budget, we have a boatload of work to do, and it isn't going to be pretty. No. It's going to be a lot of cutting. It's going to affect deep into programmatic decisions, and it's going to be work that we're going to have to do to figure out how to operate our schools for a year with the default budget. And the common definition of, well, the default is last year's budget. We already cut a bunch of stuff to get to where we are, and we're going to have to cut more. And I just think that's the reality that we have to understand going into this. And so I'm going to, if it's okay with the board, I think turn this over to Doug to do a little bit more of a deeper dive into the numbers and how we got to where we are, and then what the impacts would be, so that we all understand it, because the public is going to struggle understanding where we are and what the impacts are, and we have to make sure it's clear.
And if I may, that's great, and I'm certainly looking forward to the overview. Even the numbers, I'm referencing the tax rate estimate revenue and expenses spreadsheet that Mr. Totten sent across. There's 2 tabs on there: fiscal year 24, current, as well as fiscal year 24, which was used for January 5th. That spreadsheet even has different numbers than we were reported on January 4th, the evening before. So I'd like to be able to paint the picture between the operating budget of $24,233,28, a default budget of $24,078,993, which were the numbers as of last Wednesday, January 4th, to where we are today. Like, how do they reconcile?
Doug, does it help if I display a particular
Yeah, if you want to do the tax rate estimate.
one? Yep, let me just find it.
Does anybody need that document sent to them?
I think we all have it, don't we?
Yeah, I just didn't know if you had it handy.
Going on the phone.
The one I have is tax rate estimate revenue and expenses.
I'm surprised it's not coming up. Let me just, oh, wait a minute. I don't know where I'm searching. Bear with me. I'll get it pulled up because I'm in a separate
Doug,
drawing.
Andrew, and I are in it.
Yep, hang on. I wasn't in the right spot. Go ahead. I don't understand the search.
No, that's not it.
No. Hang on.
Can I just have you comment? This budget has nothing to do with what happened last year. All of our debts have been paid.
Not true.
You don't think so?
I know
The
so.
350?
Andrew's correct on that.
Yeah.
I'll go over.
Okay, because
where-
I
where
think
we're
that
at.
needs to be
Yeah.
addressed.
Are you sharing it with me?
I'd share it with you, yeah, so it should go to the
Because
top
there's
of
still
your.
a lot of gray area in that. Oh, I saw what you, yeah.
No, I'm sorry. Shared with me.
But
Tax rate.
from what I understand, the result of the huge differential is that the kitchen, basically, that it's carried over into the next year. That the kitchen project has been delayed.
Yeah, it's voter-approved work, right? We all
Right.
recognize that.
Yes.
And now our municipal, the lease will be expended.
Yep.
And we still have a balance of work to be completed.
Right.
So if you
And a
wanna
contract.
Hit the second tab. On the bottom.
Let me blow it up so people see. The FY '24 used for 1.5?
Yeah.
Yep, okay.
All right, so starting where we left off last week. So we presented a operating budget and then a default budget. So the operating budget is going down column C. It's the first numbers that you see as you look from the left over. So starting with a 24,180,328,000. And the default budget is the next column, followed by 2021 and 2022 and 2021.
But even that is different than what the board reviewed and what we discussed on January 4th.
So what the board did not see on January 4th
Yep.
was, as we look down the 2023 tax rate, the first column, the Fund 30 capital projects. So the board was aware of the first number, Fund 10,
No, that's,
was $50,000 more than that,
okay,
which
so
was consistent with what the board saw on
230.
January 4th. So at the last budget committee hearing, they reduced the budget by 50,000. So since we put in a warrant article which talked about severance pay as well as benefits, being able to kind of put some of that money into a warrant article just to kind of help with the influxes of, say, a new person takes a position and they come in and they going to elect a family plan, where the person before them elected a two-person, it would kind of help with those bumps. So that number has been reduced by the budget committee, 50,000. So that was
Yep.
not the number that was seen before, 50,000 off due to budget committee voting on that.
Thank you.
So the food service is what people have been seeing. The special revenue of 575,000 has not changed. And then the 815 was different, wasn't seen, and the 815 has since been altered. But to explain what the 815 is made up of. So the 815 is a capital projects fund, so it's when we created that number, and the reason why it's different now is that we were overly transparent. So we put in all of the expenses that would remain on North Branch, as well as the expenses that we expect to go for the commissioning agent for the LMS work and the architect fees for the LMS work. And then we set aside some money towards the elementary project. Now, the elementary project was always going to be offset by the capital expendable trust fund for that. And a portion of the work still left to do at the middle school was going to be offset by the remaining municipal lease loan. So as we scroll down on this page, we will notice that we have our appropriations, so how much we are going to expense in a year, and then we have revenues, which come off the appropriations before they move to the taxpayers to figure out how much tax they're going to be paying towards the local schools. So as we move down, we see some that have been here for a while, tuition and earnings on investments, but we go down further and we see an energy efficiency Eversource of 63,200. So that is new, and that is because the work at LMS has sealed the envelope, and the work has included high efficiency mechanicals there, so, you know, that the heating and the lighting aren't gonna need as much energy. So Eversource has a rebate, which we have signed, and we would receive $63,200 the year one, once everything's complete. And then if we prove to them that, you know, these updates actually meet their standards, we would receive that same amount again after 12 years of operation, 12 months of operation. So the next two things are the Capital Improvement Expendable Trust Fund and the municipal lease. Those we put in there again. Our goal is to be transparent, but in this case we were overly transparent. What I mean by that is that the municipal lease that's a number which was already voted on by the public, and we started with 4.95 million, and this is the amount that we believe we'd have remaining of that 4.95 million. So the public already knew about the 4.95 million, and they voted on it, and therefore were authorized to be able to spend that 4.95 million. So while this went in on January 4th and January 5th, it has since come out. So we don't have to appropriate or raise this 304,000 or count it towards our expenses for the capital project fund because we already have it. Same being said with the 40,000 that's right above that in the Capital Improvement Expendable Trust Fund. So we have that money. It has come from fund balances from other years, and you know, the school board is authorized to expend that money as well. So the three numbers that further got impacted was two of those revenues, the expendable trust fund, the municipal lease, and then as we go up, that 815,000. So if you scroll up, 815,316 for the capital projects. So if we go to the current one, we will see
Current, which one? Oh, to the other tab, sorry.
the other tab,
Flipping tabs, got it.
470.
that it is now 470. So that is, again, how much we expect the work to still cost at the middle school. And then, and the 470 isn't showing anything for the elementary school, because again, the 40,000 was going against that. So it's the difference between how much work is left at the middle school and how much we have for the municipal lease. So we still would need around $470,505 to complete that work. So if we move down on this spreadsheet, as we take away the expenses, we take away the revenue as well. So the revenue got zeroed out from here.
Yep.
So both of those changes, all those changes did not impact the tax rate on this because the revenue was, the expenses were matched with revenue. So there were other changes that occurred that did impact the default budget. And it ended up bringing the default budget down. And some of those changes were the finishing up of looking at non-union benefits. So benefits of union members, because it went into two warrant articles, both for the support staff and professional staff. It's warrant articles that talk about we're signing a new contract. That new contract is either 3 years or 2 years, depending on the union. And this contract comes with a cost this year, as well as those years in the future. So that is something that was signed off by the town, and so those increases in salaries and benefits can be included in there. What cannot be included in the default budget is the increases of benefits for non-union people. So January 4th, most of the non-union increases had been taken out, but not all of them. So the default budget was brought down by more as we took out more of the increases to the non-union benefits. So, and then there was also just a simple math error where the spreadsheet was adding more cells than it should have. So I caught that, and the default budget was brought down even more. So since last time we were here, the tax rate has been impacted for the operating budget. So again, column C, by the 50,000 that was reduced by the budget committee at their last meeting. And it has been also impacted and reduced by the changes that have been made in the default budget. So if we scroll all the way down,
What color?
so blue.
Yep.
So when we look at warrant article tonight, we will see that the operating budget has an increase from currently of $1.22 in the tax rate, and the default budget would have an increase of 56 cents for the tax rate. So that's where the numbers currently stand.
I don't think I've ever seen that big of an increase year over year,
No.
ever. I mean, for the past 5 years, we've been right around 1-2%.
So let's talk through that for a second,
Yeah.
because
It's not because of extravagance and
No.
no. It's got to do, I think, and make my language better, but it's got to do with the fact that we passed 2 collective bargaining agreements. You had a
Yep.
$350,000 CBA for teachers or professional staff. You had a $100,000 CBA for support staff. So that almost 500,000 ends up being what gets added into the operating budget. So there's a $500,000 of it
Right.
just explained by 2 CBAs, right? And
Yep.
then you have all the other cost items that were factored in that end up being the reason why that differential occurred.
My view is a bit different, right? And correct me if my thinking is wrong, right? We have a deficit that we covered off for last fiscal year. We covered it off in September. The board voted to clear the deficit in September, but that impacted last fiscal year, right? So we could close the books. We also have continued costs and deficit that we're clearing this year. And in addition to that, you're rolling in $470,500 into next year. That $470,000 otherwise wouldn't be there. So we now have 3 years of deficit that we're trying to clear.
Yep, when we presented in September, we said there was a gap between what it will cost and then how much money we have coming in for the municipal lease.
And I think what wasn't, abundantly clear at all at that time, and I think it's becoming clear, right, is by the time we close our books this year, the deficit will have been solved for. There wasn't any clarity in September that it would carry over yet again to another fiscal year. That has changed with, all right, we can pay it, work's being done, in this year, we can pay for it, in that year, we don't have to pay for it. So there's reasons why, but that wasn't clear in September when we were
So in
having these
September, we
discussions.
would have known at that point that the cafeteria and the kitchen were not being done, and we were clear on that, so that would have been future North Branch bills as well. So if there was a deficit this past year, and there was a deficit this year, and we were gonna continue to do work, it would move towards a deficit, next year as well.
I think the reality is, and my view is, if we didn't have the deficit, if we didn't have this $470,000, you're right on par with where we were every other year. Right. CBA aside, all that. I mean, we've taken attrition cuts in the budgets. We've made decisions to reduce the budget and to keep it lean. To me, the driver is the 470 because of the deficit.
well, it's half of it, right? I
That-
mean,
That's half of the differential. I think, Andrew, and I want to make sure that I understand what you're saying correctly, because we did close the deficit last year. So
Yep.
by taking the revenue out of the funds, we closed the deficit as it was known, and we closed the books on the year neutral. And so I'm not sure how that impacts this. I agree with you, the 470 additional is certainly impacting, and then I think it's adding in the 2 CBAs and the other expense items that were on the warrant, and that's how you're getting to the nearly $1 million.
Right, but I mean, on a typical year, right, a budget increase would be, I don't know, 500,000 to 700,000 in that range, right? So the CBAs I would include as a part of that, as a part of voter approved, as a part of normal increases to a budget based upon what was voter approved. Above and beyond that is the 470, right? I'm making no connection between the 1.5 or whatever it was that was board approved in September, other than highlighting for the public that we're carrying over for 3 years. Although the vote was in September of 2022, that vote that the board actioned was actually to clear the previous fiscal year's budget. In addition to that, there's money and work happening this year that we need to pay for. And then again, in addition to that, there's work that's gonna be remaining to be performed out of our next year's budget that will also need to be covered, because there'll be no more municipal lease to offset it.
So I think we
Did-
definitely started
Did I
with.
say that clear?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Yep. So the schools, which involves the teachers and all the staff there, they worked hard to bring a reasonable budget, a budget which was pretty lean towards the superintendent. And then we worked to we made further cuts. The school board made further cuts and the budget committee made further cuts. So if we talk about the general fund budget, even though it went up by 3.51%, I think when people knew some of the reasons why it had to go up, which was energy and which was a municipal lease, the people felt comfortable with that 3.51% for between last year and this year. No one always wants to go up by 3.51%, but kind of looking at each of the lines, people definitely were at a good spot. And I agree that the 470,000 does not help things after that.
So bottom line right now, we are at 25,920, 283 for an operating budget. And we're at 25,127, 836 for a default budget, which is a difference of $792,447.
Which we will have to make further cuts to if we have the default budget. We'll have to cut 700,000.
Well, the difference,
Yeah.
I'm a realist like everybody else. I would anticipate the default, hope for the operating, but anticipate the default and plan for the default, right? And with that being said, on top of having a reduced operating budget, which is, no, you're not a spreadsheet, which is 23,858,386, which is about, I don't know, 250,000 or so different than the operating budget. In addition to that, you'll also have to cover the deficit.
Cover the deficit of what? Like,
The,
so,
the 470, Tina, right? So
yeah.
the operating
Right,
budget.
will have to come out of somewhere.
The operating budget is 24,180,328, right?
Right, no, I get that.
Okay.
I just, so what I understand, what you just said was it's $750,000 that,
Between the two.
between the two. So if we get the default, we have to, I think you're agreeing with Liz, right? We have to make reductions in how we run
We
operations.
have to figure out how to pay for the deficit and our bills out of our operating budget.
Yeah, right. So what would you cut?
I don't know that we need to make that decision. I think we need to wait and see what the voters say.
Well, I think
Well,
we need
I
to at
think
least
the
think about
voters
it.
should know going in where the cuts are gonna be.
I absolutely agree.
Otherwise, I think, we risk a lot more.
I think so. I think we need to decide.
I think people need to know what it's gonna look like if there's a default budget.
If we're not comfortable with it, why not just make a bottom line cut now and reduce it?
Because we need to fund our schools.
But
We
you're
need
saying,
to fund how we provide an education to our students.
I get it, but
So
you're
what
saying
I'm
we're gonna have to
saying,
make
Andrew,
this
is what we need to do is we need to say what will be cut if we get the default budget. It's going to be positions. It's going to impact our.
Reading specialists,
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
My position, yeah.
You can't just, I don't think it's responsible of us to say, yeah, go ahead and pick, and then we'll figure out what we're going to do. I think
We need a plan.
there's a responsibility of the voters
I
to find out which,
agree.
which option, each option looks like.
But that's part of our readiness. I don't know that we're able to solve that in the next 30 minutes.
No, definitely not, but I think we need to have it before deliberative.
I agree with that wholeheartedly, I really do. I think for me, one of the biggest things that needs to be explained, and to the average person makes no sense, that the tax rate is literally double for the proposed budget versus the default budget.
So,
Obviously, it's not proportional to the whole thing, so that is very confusing for people who aren't in the nitty gritty and don't understand what's added and what's subtracted and
Do you
what's
understand what
counted.
she's saying?
yeah, so
I'm
I
following you.
believe I do, but what's double is the increase in the tax, not the actual tax. So if we go back to that other spreadsheet,
It's the change from the previous
It's a
year
change.
that
yeah,
is the benchmark, right? That's on the warrant. That's what people are going to look at. So that, I feel, is extraordinarily important to explain why.
You see
So
56
currently-
cents versus $1.22, you know what box people are checking.
Yeah.
Well, but why is it so drastically different when, and I think Mr. Leary said that during the budget committee meeting, when it's not double, so helping
Right.
people to understand why the tax
Yeah.
increase is so different.
So, I mean, currently, when people saw their tax bill for the local education, they saw $12.78 per thousand. So with the default, that would rise to, is that $13.35? And then with the operating budget, that would be $14. So the increase is double for the operating. So what we know is what's making up some of that, a big chunk of that increase is that $470,000 that is to complete the work at the middle school. Now, there's always going to be a difference between a default budget and an operating budget. They're created in two different ways. An operating budget is kind of just start from scratch. What do we need at the school? What do we need for learning to occur? What do we need to retain people? What positions do we need, as well as what things do we need? What books do we need? What software do we need? So that's kind of building a budget from the ground up. Default budget is completely different. A default budget is taking your current budget and then going up or down by one-time expenses. So one-time expense that went down on this default budget was that we had $22,000 in for a chairlift at the middle school. That's being put in this year. It's not going to be put in next year. We don't need a second lift, so therefore $22,000 comes off. So it also goes up and down by contracts that have been passed, by things that are mandated by law. So two different ways to arrive at a number. So some of the gap in there is ways that we want it to go up as a district, but they're not necessarily contract-based or mandated by law. So there is the textbook series, which is around $50,000. So that would be great if we could bring in, I think the textbook series, is that the reading one or the math one? So reading. So, that's K through? It's K through 5 reading.
I'm sorry, it's 1 through 5.
1 through 5 reading. So, obviously reading and math are the key points to an elementary school. Having a program that, our current program, I believe, is no longer really being revamped. So we need to move to a program which is being updated. So there's 50,000 right there. There's roughly around 30,000 if you take kind of the software for instruction and the software for technology, which wouldn't be bumped up in a default budget because it's not mandated. But again, it's important for that learning process of a school, whether that be the iReady, which can kind of match where a kid is. So if we have a 5th grade kid in math, some 5th grade kids are operating at a 7th grade level, and some are operating at a 3rd grade level, and different variances like that too. So iReady allows the kid to kind of go at their pace on the math. So important things for learning, but not necessarily part of that mandated by law part of a default budget. Another thing in there is the benefits that go towards the non-union people. So we've had several people who have moved in with positions and they have family plans where the last time it was on the books for this year, what got voted on in those positions were either single person or 2-person plans or no plans. So, and as well as we've just had increases to benefits as well. So that's over 100,000 right there. So these are, benefits are what bring people to places and they're typical. I mean, I'm one of them. I came in with a family plan, but I also left my last place with a family plan type of thing too, so.
So Doug, I understand what you're saying about why we don't include these things in the default.
Yeah.
My understanding, though, I guess my understanding was a little bit different. If we can't, we sign contracts with our non-union employees, and we agree that we will provide them with these benefits, and that's part of their hiring package. That's part of the contract that they sign in April. So were we to get the default, and we can't provide those benefits, aren't we in violation of those contracts?
So the way the default would it thinks of it differently is the we is the town. So the town signed the town agreed on the contract for union people. They're never presented with a contract for myself or an individual person type of thing too. So with default budgets, then what they say is you have to make it up other ways. It's a bottom line budget. So if you need to move 100,000 into benefits, you need to take 100,000 from something else. So those are a couple of the examples. There's also energy and there's transportation. So in our default budget, we increase the energy because we're mandated by law to have school for 180 days, and we need to have proper ventilation, lighting, and heating. But school is 180 days. So what we did was we took off 20% of the increase for those non-school days. And of course, during the school days are your winter days where you need lighting more and you need heating more. So we felt 20% was the right number to take off. So that difference, that 20% difference, is not in the default budget. Same with transportation. So with transportation, it's, if it's, what makes it into the default budget is increases if it's part of an IEP, as well as increases to school and back from school. Now, mandated from law, though, is if you're within, I think it might be a mile or mile and a half of school, that you don't have transportation. And if you're a high school student, that's not mandated as well. Now, we're a little bit simpler with high school because they ride the buses with our middle school students. So we get charged a price to have our elementary kids go out, and we get charged a price for our middle school kids to go out, and the high school kids just happen to be on it as well. But we took off a percentage of that as well because of the fact that, we provide within the mile or mile and a half, as I think we probably should in Litchfield, especially the elementary school is on a busy road and there's not really sidewalks down there. But again, the default budget is mandated by law.
Yeah.
So there are these discrepancies where we have to try to figure out what is that mandated part and what isn't, and that's going to grow the difference in there as well. Now, this year has been tricky because energy costs they've gone up. So a more beneficial year for everybody is when they go down. So if energy costs go up and we're increasing them in a default budget, the opposite would happen if energy costs went down. We would decrease the default budget. But that's a great way to decrease the default budget because that means the taxpayers are paying less. Kids are still warm because energy costs cost less, and we're not impacting any of the other learning parts. But it's that discrepancy between mandated by law, voted on, not necessarily by the governing body, but by the townspeople.
Thank you. So I think a reasonable, we know how much money makes up the difference, and we kind of in that overview, you gave several examples of, what would be on the table if we got the default. Is that right? Is that a fair way to look at it, or?
So I think one timing factor in this all, and again, we're not going to count revenue before we have it. So when I talk about that 63,200, I've seen the contract. I've gone back and forth with Eversource. I'm confident that that's coming in. So what we are aware of, but not confident because it has not been finalized, is the Inflation Reduction Act, which got passed this summer by Congress. And the IRS has through some point in February to write what it's going to look like. Now that is reimbursement for for-profit, non-profit, so schools are involved with that, and it's for, part of it's about the economy, about the environment, I'm sorry. So how can we get more money into those jobs which are helping the environment? So part of that is sealing up a school or a house or something like that. So that's what happened at the middle school. So insulation went up, both in the rafters as well as they dug down. And then it's also about making any building have the mechanicals that actually operate efficiently. Well, that's where the money went at the middle school as well. So we are being led to believe that we are going to be reimbursed for some of that work through the Inflation Reduction Act. The timing of it doesn't have us have anywhere near an idea what that would be right now in January. But if the IRS, they have through some point in February, so February, by March, we would have a better understanding of where we would be. So as we
Cautiously optimistic for a
cautiously
rebate.
optimistic
Yeah.
that as we look at making up this 470,000 where we don't have a revenue source for, this could be a revenue source for that. But we're not going to put a dollar amount on it right now because we don't want to be
Premature.
misleading. Yep.
Yeah.
So in the way that you just outlined how you calculate the default budget, and I think this is what you were getting at, is it on the table in your minds, or is it, I guess anything's on the table, but is it an actual serious proposal that elementary school students who live within a mile wouldn't have transportation?
No, they should
That's
definitely.
something that
they-
is a consequence of having the default budget, because we're removing, you said you're removing a certain portion because it's what's required by law, and by law, anyone who lives within a mile, so I'm just,
Or not
that's-
transporting high
that's
school
a-
students.
right, or not transporting the high school student, I mean, I
That's a
guess,
good
I
question.
wanna understand, and I
We're
think
under a
this is,
contract with first student.
But not for high school.
So that's a good question. So it's, the default budget gets you to a number. What you do with that number is local control. So
absolutely, but I'm
So
saying, so I'm asking you, I guess,
I
more
would
more than
not,
you.
So-
I would not recommend that we didn't
We're
transport
we're
elementary
not
students.
going to have
Yeah.
kids walking along 3A, let's
Yeah.
say that out
Okay.
loud.
Yeah.
Good.
However, you're welcome, Dan. However, there's less money in the transportation budget.
Yeah.
So that means to not have kids walk along 3A, we're gonna have to move the money from somewhere else. And
Yes.
that means something else will have to be cut. We had to take the cut because it's not mandated by law.
Right.
So it had to come out of that line.
Right.
But of course, we're gonna do it, and we're gonna provide that service, which means we've gotta find that money somewhere else. Can we just settle on, Doug, give us, what is the number, if we have the default number, the default budget, if that's what ends up passing, what is the amount that we're gonna have to cut? Cause I
So-
got two numbers in my head, and I wanna make sure I know which one is right.
So one's a little bit more known, and that's the 321,000, which is the difference between, just for the general fund, operating budget and the default budget.
So it's those two numbers.
Yeah, because we know what goes into, and we agreed of what went into the operating budget, and people felt comfortable with that. So that's the difference there. The 470 is what it's gonna cost to finish up at the middle school. Now, why I say that's unknown a little bit is that I believe there's more of a chance that that would be less than 470 than more than 470. Because at the end of it, North Branch has their own contingency, which if it doesn't get spent, it comes back to us as well. And it doesn't mean that everything that they put an allowance for, so they redid the air handling unit in the gym part of the middle school. And they had an allowance for that. And they're almost complete with that work. And they're pretty positive that that amount that they had for the allowance, they're not gonna meet. So say if that is 3,000 off or 5,000 off, that money comes back as well. So that 470 is more of a top number, or, more going towards a worst-case scenario. So that number could come down. But again, we're gonna present what we believe as of now, North Branch is telling us that it might cost to finish the project.
The North Branch contingency, I'm going off the top of my head here, is approximately 172. That was the contingency in the budget, right, in that range.
Right, yeah, I think so.
Right, so we know that we're gonna tap into that at least a little bit. We're not
Yep.
gonna get all the 172.
They've already tapped
We've
into
already
that.
tapped into it.
Right,
Yep.
right. So that being said, we're starting at 792. We know that 172 is really the differential, Doug, that you're talking about. So call it 620, right? The difference between 792 and 172?
I think you're very low on it, Andrew, because, so I added the two numbers up that Doug just had and ended at 792 and chose, in my mind, to round down to 750. Because I think there are still contingency things that we're gonna face, at LMS that are going to
We talk
make
about
it.
like a surge protector. We talk about, you know
Thank
what I
you.
mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so I'm being more
However, aren't
conservative
we
in
paying
saying,
those contingency bills as we're getting them? We're not holding them till the end.
Nope.
Every contingency bill
Right.
at this point has been paid, that's been finalized. There could be the unknowns that could be there as a
You're saying
dedicated.
the contingency that's gonna happen over the summer, the remaining summer project.
Yeah, yeah, so,
I'm trying to anchor us on a number, and I think this 750, unless you're gonna add more to it, Andrew. I
No,
heard it,
I'm
and then,
trying to do and play all the scenarios in my
because
head.
I'm thinking 750, and then what we have to do is say, what does cutting $750,000 look like?
Exactly.
And then if it's only 700 or only 600, it doesn't look as bad. But I think if we anchor on 600 and end up having to do 750, we just got to go deeper.
Yep.
So on some level, I think the 750 is a better anchor point. Doug, do you agree or disagree?
no, I think 750. Yeah, I mean, right now we're showing the 792, but I think that's worst
In
case, so,
addition to the reductions already made to the budget, right, that is a significant cut.
Huge.
yes. Yeah, you don't make up 750, unfortunately, without cutting people.
Position.
That's gonna be cutting
Yeah,
positions,
there's
right?
no way.
There's no way.
And let's just
There's programming, I mean,
and let's just keep talking about that for a second. So those are cuts to cover that, right?
Yeah.
And on top of that, you're looking at, take the non-union staff, right? So no raises, no increases there, right? So you've got directors and administrators and, I'm trying to think who
Tutors.
else comes in that. We've got some tutors, et cetera, that are in that category because they're not covered by either CBA, who are now implementing a $750,000 cut while they're being held static in an environment where jobs are plentiful and opportunities exist. So just play it out. I want to say it out loud now so that we understand what the dynamic that has been set up means.
I'd like time to certainly digest this.
Yes, we absolutely need time to digest.
Yeah,
We
and I
all
do
need
agree.
time to digest it, but if
Not
we
almost,
walk into
yeah.
the hearing and the public's gonna have a hard time grappling with this and coming to understand it, right? The gut reaction of people who look at this is, you're gonna get the default. And it's like, okay, but
But this is
let's
what that
understand what that means.
exactly.
And I agree, going into deliberative, that's the time where we have to say, this is our plan, because we've been asked for our plan on closing other gaps. Here's our plan if we end up with default, and it's gonna take a boatload of work to figure that out, but. And you'll notice, I also, if you go back to the warrant, so the budget committee voted to recommend it by a 5-4 vote. So they're one vote differential on their recommendation. The board hasn't voted yet.
But they need to change their vote. 'cause
And
the
they
numbers
have
change.
to
They're gonna change their
revote
vote.
because the numbers have changed. So
Yeah.
that's why I put it in highlighting,
Yeah.
because with the other numbers, they were at 5-4. We don't know where they're gonna land at the end of this, so.
Yeah.
When are we voting on these articles?
So we have two options on that. We are, at 6:30, we're gonna recess, or 6:40, whatever time, recess to
6:30.
drive to the high school. Remember, I think the town is presenting first, right?
It looks
The
like
town
it
is
from the
presenting
order of
first.
the slides.
Yeah.
And so we will be in recess, and then we can reconvene on the floor. LCTV will still be there. So we could reconvene and vote and have further dialogue. We may say, we need time to think about it, and we have January 18th, which I
Wednesday.
think is still, you know what, I'm gonna have to double check, when we need to finalize the warrant. I just need to make sure that the 18th is
My
within our
recommendation is to
window.
do it tonight.
Pardon?
My recommendation is to do it tonight. My view is we should have done it at last week's meeting.
But we didn't have the number either.
Right.
I mean, and it would have changed, but
But we
yes.
would have re-voted, right? Same thing.
So I believe it's scheduled, this meeting is scheduled to go to 6:40, but we only have LCTV until 6:30, so which gives us 12 minutes.
What I'd like to do is make a motion. I'm going to start with Article 2. I'm going to make a motion to approve Article 2 as written.
A second.
So,
Discussion. Oh,
so let me comment on Article 2. You jumped on me there. That's
Sorry.
good. I can pivot here. So the question that we've been asked, this came up at the budget meeting after you looked at it, and the question was, so if Article 2 passes and the 500,000 is raised, what happens on June 30th of 2029 to that money. And again, there's a trust factor that people raised, and they said, where's the money gonna go? And the answer is, it lapses and the money goes back to the taxpayers. I had a conversation with Gordon to say, should we add a sentence at the end of that, which basically makes that really clear and says, this is what happens. Now, to legalese people, of course that's what happens. It lapses, so the money goes back.
Right.
But for clarity on a warrant, if you want, Gordon has sent me a sentence that would appear at the end. I gotta find it in my email. But that sentence would basically state, if the article lapses and the property is not closed on, the money is returned to the taxpayers. So that it's just a statement there that we'll still have to run by DRA to make sure that they're okay with it. But
I think once we do our due diligence, we can always add it at deliberative, which I'd be happy to do.
Can it also be added in the notes? Aren't there notes
For the
sometimes?
the voter guide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I said to Gordon, we're gonna obviously explain that, we're gonna answer that question, we're gonna put it in the voter guide in the notes, but the feedback we were hearing, if I heard it right, was it should be in the warrant so that everybody knows exactly what occurs. So
Right.
so you may get that feedback tonight from the public that it needs to say that, and I will find Gordon's email, it came in today, but I'll find that and have the exact language to read if that's what the board would like.
Yes, I would like that.
So you're voting on it in what form? Without the sentence?
In the
But-
current
I
In
form.
the
think-
current
I think-
form. Right?
I think we need to vote on these tonight too, before going in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So
I'll leave
motion
a
and
first and second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained.
Madam Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve Article 3 as written.
I'll second. All those in favor? Oh, do you have anything to add, Dr. Jettie?
So let me talk a little bit about the
Yeah,
Budget
that's
Committee on
important
this
to
one,
discuss.
because I want you to note that the Budget Committee voted not to recommend it by a 4-5 vote. And what I heard from the people voting against it is that the phrase I'm highlighting here, which is school capital improvements. So the concern was that we had utilized the money in the Building Maintenance Capital Reserve Fund to help close the gap that occurred with the middle school project, and that the words capital improvements are what allowed us to do that. And so, because of that, the committee said we can't recommend putting money back in there. Their recommendation was that we eliminate this fund, so we put a warrant article to close this fund out, and then reestablish a maintenance fund that only says building maintenance and repairs. And after they took the vote, I said to the Budget Committee, I'm like, so let's just do a thought experiment for a minute. We have it named exactly as you said, and all it says is building maintenance and repairs. We replaced windows, we replaced a roof, we replaced HVAC equipment, we replaced, I said, it would have still qualified. I said,
Right.
it's an unfortunate situation that we had to dip into it. There's no doubt about that.
Right.
But taking the words capital improvements out would not preclude the use of that for the project that occurred at the middle school. And the Budget Committee was like, you were there. I mean, I thought people were like, yeah, I guess you're right. So I don't know what the right wording is. I'm hoping that the feedback to the Budget Committee tonight is we have to have a fund to cover building maintenance. We have issues that go on in all our schools, and this is the rainy day fund that we need to be able to fall back on. So
I think to your point, it's the rainy day fund. I think the board's well aware, and the public probably who follows is well aware that I'm not happy that we drained those accounts in the first place.
Right.
But we need, it's water
None
under
of
the
us
bridge.
are.
None of us
It's
are
water,
happy
it's
that we
water
have
under
to
the
drain those
bridge that
accounts.
we need to put money back in the account. The reality is, I don't project or see how we're even gonna have money to put in the account, but I hope I'm wrong.
I mean, I think the other thing, and we talked about this, is that the feedback we did hear at the September 19th meeting was to try to avoid taking all of the balance from
Correct.
the
Leaving some in
that
there.
repair fund, that rainy day fund, and the hope was that that would be affected the least out of the different funds that we needed to use. And so I would hope that people tonight are going to tell the Budget Committee and speak and say that they want that fund replenished. I don't know.
Okay, motion in a second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained.
Madam Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve Article 4 as written.
Do you want to roll that up, Doug? Or whoever's rolling?
Getting there. Article 4.
Oh, nice.
Sorry, I'm watching the time.
Yeah,
You're good, you're good.
I seconded for anyone.
discussion?
Okay.
Oh, thanks.
All right, thank you.
Any further discussion? Article 4?
There really was, you'll notice the budget committee voted 6-3 to support this one. And so this didn't have the same question as the other one.
Okay. We have a first and a second. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstained? 5-0-0.
Madam Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve Article 5 as written.
I'll second.
Discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained.
Before making motions on Article 1, I figured turn it back over to the board for conversation.
About adding the sentence, Article 1. Further
Oh,
discussion?
Article 1, yeah.
Yeah, we're back to Article 1.
Article 1 is the budget.
Budget,
Yes.
yeah.
So we want to add the line.
No, that was for
No,
Article
yeah.
2.
That was
Sorry.
Article 2, yeah.
No,
Sorry.
I mean, I think the big issue with Article 1, I mean,
Besides the
the
big
question
issue.
is, and I think it's a fair question, is if we had to come up with that 750 and make those cuts, where would they be to, so that the public is educated about, if you're going to vote for the default budget, which you have every right to do, and you see it as the smaller number,
Correct.
understand this is how it will impact the schools in these specific ways.
And that can be done at deliberative. And
It can be
the
done at
vote-
deliberative.
The vote,
Yeah.
the voter guide too.
I mean, that doesn't affect my vote whether or not to recommend warrant
Correct.
Article 1. So we don't have a motion on that yet, right?
No.
So I'll make a motion to approve Article 1,
Second.
to vote to recommend Article 1.
Further discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Oh, did you have any discussion?
No.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Abstained? 0.
410.
4-1-0.
Andrew, can I ask why your vote was no?
Sure, I don't believe we should be funding the deficit. I think we should figure out other ways to pay for the deficit. It should not carry over into a third fiscal year.
The difference in the budget is not just what you're calling the deficit. I think we have to fund the deficit because we have parts and equipment on order. We have the project underway. We have to complete the project. And I don't like the fact that the estimated tax impact is so high, or that the percentage increase is so high, but I don't see how there's no other way out of it. You recommended that we put next year's costs in the operating budget, which we did. That was your suggestion and motion, and we followed that.
Well, that should have been
Right.
done anyways, right?
Right, but now you're voting against the budget that we worked to present, and
Which is my choice,
I understand.
right?
just
It's
don't-
it's too much for the taxpayers to absorb. It just is.
So, hopefully by the next school board meeting, we will have thoughts in all of our heads about what's going to need to be cut if it's the default budget, and we're going to have a serious discussion about that. And we're going to have to lay it out. So if we get the default budget, then that's
I mean, I think we
That's where
can
it
say
lays.
pretty clearly, and I hate even being the one that has to vocalize it, but we obviously voted to add in 100 and whatever thousand to keep that fourth music teacher. I think that is probably one of the first things that we'll have to, would be, would have to
Right.
go. And so again, for the people that were incredibly vocal on Facebook and sent in a lot of correspondence about wanting to keep that fourth music teacher, this would be an example of something that, again, likely would programmatically have to be
Yep.
reduced.
It goes beyond that too, I think.
Oh, it absolutely, it does, because that's
It
only,
goes,
what,
I mean,
150?
we're looking at,
Tutors.
yeah, we're looking
Reading
at not
specialists.
upgrading, well, I mean, one of the options was the reading program, right? And, you know, the unfortunate thing is these are costs that, it's just the cost of doing business. It's the cost of running schools.
And I know we had a lot of conversation about vacant positions in the budget, right? Those vacant positions are still in the budget, right?
Those
I know-
vacant positions are necessary.
Well, I agree, as are the teachers who are staffed in the current positions. So,
I guess my point is you're not recommending the school board sends a message to voters that the school board is not, that one member of the school board doesn't support this budget. That
The vote's very much in favor of the school board. It's 4-1.
one board member does not support this budget.
It's his right not to.
I understand.
We all can vote how we, we all vote our conscience and we do it on a regular basis. And that's, I think
Yep.
we have it, regardless of the message it sends, I mean, it doesn't change the reality of the situation. So,
We're all speaking for different voters, different classes, different.
understand.
Yeah.
I get where you're coming. I'm not disagreeing with you,
Right.
but I also, obviously, because I voted in the for, but I
Yep.
don't know it'll do any good to continue
it
down
won't.
this path without some recommendations from administrators that are in the room. So thank you guys for all coming tonight. In terms of how we're going to come up with that 750 if the default budget is what's passed in this town.
Just kind of reacting to that also, so keep in mind, Griffin's personnel numbers are really driven by enrollment. We've already taken
Right.
into effect, move the
Yep.
class, the big classes going from here to there, that's all factored in. It's not like, and classes, by the way, are on the high side
Yes.
of enrollment numbers. So you're not talking personnel at Griffin in terms of teaching personnel. You would have to be looking at, we've added social workers and people who can work with kids that are struggling, and
The
that's
tutors and.
yeah, those
And
are
I
Specialists.
have to say,
And-
I don't wish to put this on the administrators.
But
They
you're-
already presented quite lean budgets. They already made reductions in staff
They have.
at all three schools. They've already shown us, what they could possibly do without. And I don't think you should have to cut anymore. It's,
I don't think they should either, but I also want to know if we have to cut somewhere. I want their recommendations on where it's going to be, even if
well,
it is
obviously,
painful.
but I just want you all to know that it absolutely kills me that we're in this position.
And, the other thing to keep in mind is LMS has already taken reductions relative to the double math English,
Right,
and so forth.
We
So
reduced
they're,
office staff at all three schools. We've
Yep.
reduced SAU staff. I mean,
We reduced early.
yeah.
and
It's gonna
the same
hurt.
with the high school. There were cuts there.
And I feel
It's gonna hurt it's gonna hurt, and you will see.
Yes.
You will see it.
And I
I'm
find,
glad you're saying that, because that's the point that I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
And
You're
you will
not
feel it.
talking about nobody will notice
but
this. We
it's our
can figure this out.
responsibility to communicate that.
Right.
To the public.
It's our responsibility, I believe, to support the proposed budget because that's what we need to operate next year. Not because it's, us.
And the other piece is that I get really frustrated with the sense of irresponsibility that gets portrayed on us. We're fixing a school that had been ignored for how long, right? I mean, we've done a lot of positive things. The portables are gone at LMS. We figured out how to get all those classes safely inside that building. Those students are being educated within the four walls. We don't have fifth graders walking in with a key to the front door so they can go to the bathroom.
That's why
right?
it's gonna hurt so much,
So
because we've
we-
already trimmed the fat.
We have solved so many things with this, and we're now giving proper ventilation. We've leveraged federal grant funds for this. I mean, I'm just hoping that the IRA does contain the type of money. I will tell you, I was in a phone call with Senator Hassan yesterday. There were 9 superintendents in the call, and I urged her and her staff to please get us answers. I'm like, you were governor in New Hampshire. Having the answer well
Absolutely.
before March voting day is significant.
All right.
If the IRS chooses to be a month late in releasing the data, and we find out on March 15th that we're getting
Right.
some extra money, that doesn't help us with
Right,
our budget situation. So please encourage the IRS to get this thing
Yeah.
moving along. My point being, what we did was the right thing for kids and learning at Litchfield Middle School. And we have to continue to remember that and talk about that, because these are going to be really, really hard decisions if the default budget is what we have.
And I do appreciate the fact that, yes, mistakes were made. We didn't do that properly. We left a deficit where we couldn't have. And I'm glad we have Doug at the helm of the accounting to show us full transparency and tell us exactly what the numbers are looking like, even if we don't like them. So I appreciate that, and
So I have a question.
no, go ahead. No, I'm good. I'm rambling.
Obviously, this is not a great scenario, but are there any options to prepay any of this year?
Prepay what?
Any of the construction that's happening next summer? Are there any options that we have to be able to explore to pay any of that this year? For example, if one of our articles does not pass, you know, that 50, 40, or 10% won't be allocated. Do you know what I'm saying?
So you have to go to the other explanation that Doug provided about where we are with this year's budget. And
Yeah.
we feel that we're gonna come out with a fund
Right.
balance, but it's gonna be a much smaller fund balance
Very
than what we've
close,
seen.
yeah.
You know, that can get better over time, Tara.
Right.
But, you know, at the end of the year, we've always had the spend aheads, right? And I don't envision that we're gonna be having anywhere near the level of conversation that we've had in the past, right? So to get to your question, if I understand it right, the
Yeah.
pay aheads, I just don't think that this year is gonna provide that opportunity. Now, additional revenue that's known, that we don't know right now, that's helpful, that's wicked helpful. I
Right.
wasn't kidding when I said finding
Right.
out sooner than later is really beneficial
Well, and
to
if we
us.
get voter approval, you know, for what fund balance we do have to be able to be put into those trust funds, then that's, you know, that could potentially, we could, if we had to, use that next year to offset it. I hate to do it. I really hate to do it, but.
But this is why, you know, I met with this team in August, and I'm like, this is a lean year. Don't spend
Right.
money on anything that you don't need, because every penny is gonna count. It took Doug until really the end of December to be able to even make a responsible projection on it, right? So everything we do to realize funds availability now is helpful toward that question, but I think Andrew's right. There's not gonna be, there'll be money, but it's not gonna be a significant amount. And every time we buy something, that's less money. Because the only way we're gonna make that money up is by not buying things. And we haven't done a budget freeze. I wanna be clear about that. We haven't gone out and said, you can't buy anything. And we haven't put a freeze on it because we're monitoring it. But this team is working hard to make sure there's zero unnecessary expenses.
All right.
So I'll make a motion to recess. Do I need to move to do that? But I'm gonna, I think. Motion to recess to the conclusion of the budget hearing at Campbell High School.
Why? Oh, because technically we're in a meeting at the high school. Is that the idea?
It's a continuation. Is that
You
what it
Yes.
is?
can, if there's feedback in the public hearing, you can respond to it.
Where's my phone?
You will, before you adjourn.
Or
You'll-
if
You'll
the-
still be in
If
recess.
the
won't
budget committee
reconvene.
changes votes, right?
Yep.
We can change our votes if we,
It just keeps it alive.
Yeah.
activity.
Yes.
So my advice, do what you want, so we'll board on this, but by recessing, you can then have the budget committee stay in front, make their final votes, and then you can occupy those seats. LCTV will still be streaming, and you can occupy those seats and take any further action you need to and adjourn.
Was it
That sounds like, pardon?
I don't think so.
second?
Thank you.
I have a first and a second. Further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained.
Gavel us
5-0-0.
into recess. I see that in Congress.
Recess!
Thank you, Andrew.
All right, in all seriousness, I'm gonna.